Hello again. Welcome to another session of our Sunday School. As you know, we are working our way through the book of Proverbs. And just another reminder that Proverbs are wise counsel for daily living. This is from King Solomon, the wisest man to ever live. And we're certainly blessed to have the things that he says and taught us through this book. So today's lesson is entitled Accepting Discipline. And we know that discipline is certainly an important part of our lifestyle. We have it at every phase of our life, actually. And it's important to understand more about discipline and what King Solomon has to say about it. According to Webster's, discipline is the practice of training people to obey rules or a code of behavior using punishment to correct disobedience. And this is something we need to discuss. We will certainly look at this from the eyes of King Solomon and what he had to say about accepting discipline. Our lesson today is from chapter 29 of Proverbs, and we'll be looking at different verses from chapter 29. We'll begin with verse 1. One who is often reproved yet remains stubborn will suddenly be broken beyond healing. This is a situation where a person has been disciplined numerous times, and you just keep on trying to discipline that person and over, and nothing seems to work. They remain stubborn. According to King Solomon, at some point they will be broken beyond healing. That's a sad state for a person to be in. It is sad when a person is given good instructions, they've been given wise counsel, but continues to ignore it. And according to what King Solomon is saying here, at some point they're beyond healing. A parallel verse to that, one that comes to mind, Paul's letter to the Corinthian church in 1 Corinthians chapter 11 verse 30, in this particular verse he is dealing to situations within the church at Corinth, a church that had so many issues, so many problems. It would be a pastor's nightmare to try to pastor that church. They were in rebellion, they were stubborn, they were doing things that were not nowhere near close to being spiritual. It was a bad situation in Corinth. You can read those two letters and you'll see just how bad it was. And Paul says in 1 Corinthians 11:30, because of this, some are weak, some are sick, and some are dead. There comes a point where a person can reject sound teaching for so long, and eventually there's no cure for it, other than, like he told the Corinthian church, there's going to be weakness, there's going to be sickness, and eventually God will allow them to be taken out just because of their stubbornness and rebellion. But again, in verse 1, one who is often reproved yet remains stubborn will suddenly be broken beyond healing. Verse 2 of chapter 29, when the righteous are in authority, the people rejoice. But when the wicked rule, the people groan. This is a situation where you have godly leadership versus ungodly leadership. And in my career, I've had the opportunity to work for Christian supervisors, people in authority that were Christians. They took their Christian life serious. They tried to live the Christian life, And that is such a pleasure to work in a situation like that. In contrast to that, I've had to work for supervisors that they didn't seem to have a spiritual bone in their body. And it is just a lot of tension, it seems like. It doesn't mean that non-Christians can't be supervisors. It doesn't mean they can't be good supervisors. It doesn't mean they can't be good coaches. But it is so enlightening. It is just so good to work for somebody that you know their heart is in the right place and they want to serve God. And when the righteous are in authority, the people do rejoice. But when the wicked rule, the people groan. Verse 3 of chapter 29. A child who loves wisdom makes a parent glad, but to keep company with prostitutes is to destroy his wealth. We often see the contrast within a verse going from a positive to a negative. This one here is kind of a little more extreme. It goes to a child who is really trying to do everything that's right. They love wisdom. They want to learn things. They listen to their parents. They study. They do all the right things. And how glad that makes a parent. But I guess the contrast to that would be as they grow older, a person who is raised without any kind of discipline or for whatever reason gets on the wrong track and keeps company with the wrong people. In this particular verse, it refers to prostitutes, but it could be any form of ungodly living that will destroy their wealth. The end will not be good. And there we see the contrast between someone being brought up and has discipline in their life, and they are willing to accept discipline, and they make their parents glad, versus someone who strays and just winds up in poverty. Now we drop down to verse 12, and I think this is probably one of the most important verses in this chapter, or at least the one that stuck out to me, because it's King Solomon speaking here in Proverbs 29 verse 12. He says, if a ruler listens to falsehood, all his officials will be wicked. Now this is interesting because King Solomon wrote this. And the one who would follow King Solomon when he dies is his son Rehoboam. And here in verse 12, King Solomon is given the simple fact that if a ruler takes bad advice, listens to the wrong people, does the wrong things, the people surrounding him will congregate to him and they'll be wicked people. I want to read from 1 Kings chapter 12 to give the example of this happening. And I guess fortunately for King Solomon, he wasn't here to see this or to experience this. But after King Solomon dies, his son Rehoboam takes over and does exactly what King Solomon says should not happen here in verse 12. Now, who would have more experience than the son of Solomon concerning these things? But yet, given that, even he went in the wrong direction. I'm going to read from 1 Kings chapter 12, verses 3 through 14. It says, Jeroboam and all the congregation of Israel came and spoke unto Rehoboam. Now, Jeroboam would eventually become the king of the northern kingdom. He would be the first king of the northern kingdom after the nation of Israel splits. By the way, it splits during Rehoboam. I don't know that they're any kin, even though they have a very similar name. But here we see in verse 3, Jeroboam and some people come to King Rehoboam, and they say, and I'll continue in verse 4, thy father, who is Solomon, thy father made our yoke grievous. Now therefore make his heavy yoke which he put upon us lighter, and we will serve thee. Now King Solomon did have the wisdom that no one else would have. But he has put high taxes on the people. He is working the people really hard, and they are just worn out from it. And when Rehoboam takes over, Jeroboam comes to him and mentions to him, this is really what you ought to do. You need to back off a little bit. We're tired, we're worn out. The nation has done all the things that King Solomon wanted done, and we are just totally worn out from it. Would you consider lightening the load and backing off? Verse 5, and Rehoboam said to them, depart yet for 3 days, then come again to me. So the people departed. Then King Rehoboam consulted with the elders who had served his father Solomon when he was alive, and he asked them, how do you advise me to respond to these people? Now here, Rehoboam is doing exactly what he should do. He has taken over the leadership of the nation of Israel. He is new in the job. Nobody moves into a job knowing all there is to know about it. He goes to the men that surrounded Solomon to learn what should be done and how to do it, which is the right thing. They would know. They have been through Solomon. They've seen the successes. They've seen the decisions he's made. They know that this is the right thing to do. This is how to do it. So Rehoboam goes to them for advice. And they give him advice. They reply, today, if you will be a servant to these people and serve them, and if you will respond to them by speaking kind words to them, they will be your servants forever. So here is the wise advice that the people that worked with Solomon gave his son Rehoboam. Serve the people, speak kind words to them, and if you do, they will be your servants forever. Verse 8, it starts out by saying, but. When you see the word but, you know something is changing. But he rejected the advice of the elders who had advised him and consulted with the young men who had grown up with him. So instead of taking the advice of those that knew, the older, the elders, the ones with experience, instead of taking their advice, he goes to his peers, the ones he had grown up with, and he asked them for advice. He asked them, what message do you advise that we should send back to these people who said to me, lighten the yoke your father put on us? The young men who had grown up with Rehoboam told him, this is what you should tell them. My little finger is thicker than my father's waist. Although my father burdened you with a heavy yoke, I will add to your yoke. My father disciplined you with whips, but I will discipline you with scorpions. So Jeroboam and all the people came to Rehoboam on the 3rd day, as the king had ordered. Then the king answered the people harshly. He rejected the advice the elders had given him and spoke to them according to the young men's advice. My father made your yoke heavy, but I will add to your yoke. My father disciplined you with whips, but I will discipline you with scorpions. An exact contrast to what King Solomon had said in verse 12, if a ruler listens to falsehoods, all his officials will be wicked. Rehoboam had inherited the nation of Israel. He was now the king. He had been told what would it take to make it great, to continue the legacy that Solomon had started with. Yet he did right opposite of verse 12, and he takes them down a road that they do not want to go down. The nation is divided while Rehoboam is king, and it's just a sad commentary to a person that has been given every opportunity to succeed. It was handed to him on a silver platter, so to speak, and yet instead of taking the advice of those that knew better, he listened to those who didn't have a clue how it should be run, and it became a disaster. Verse 13, the poor and the oppressed have this in common. The Lord gives light to the eyes of both. Here I think in verse 13 he's making it clear that everybody might not think they have the same opportunity, but when it comes to the Lord and the spiritual things, God is going to open the eyes of all of them. Romans chapter 1, Paul identifies this. In Romans 1, he is talking about those that have never heard the truth of the gospel. And there are many. There's multitudes of people that have never had the advantages that we have. They've never had the opportunity to have a Bible or know anything about God or creation or judgment or anything about it. But in Romans chapter 1, Paul settles that dispute as to what happens to them because they've never accepted Christ, because they don't know about Christ. But in chapter 1, Paul says there's two things that they'll be judged on. From creation, there had to be a creator, and there's a basic knowledge of right and wrong that everyone knows. And it says that from creation, it is clearly seen by everyone, so that they are without excuse. It doesn't matter who it is, poor, rich, whatever. It doesn't matter where they grow up, what kind of opportunities they've had. Everybody should realize from creation there was a creator. And within every one of us, there is a basic knowledge of right and wrong. And as he says here, the poor and the oppressed have this in common. The Lord gives light to the eyes of both. We all can see that. Verse 14, if a king judges the poor with fairness, his throne will be established forever. Here, King Solomon is talking about a judge, and King Solomon was a judge, and about being fair to the people. That was what Solomon's desire was from the beginning. If you remember when he was going to inherit the kingdom of Israel from his father David, when David died, King Solomon was really concerned about that. I'm going to read you his prayer in 1 Kings chapter 3. This is Solomon when he is getting ready to take over as the king of the nation Israel. 1 Kings 3, 7 through 9. And now, O Lord my God, thou hast made thy servant king instead of David my father. And I am but a little child. Now actually, Solomon is about 20 years old here. But as he is looking at this job that he is going to have to take over, he is considering himself a little child. I am but a little child. I know not how to go out or come in. And thy servant is in the midst of thy people, which thou hast chosen, a great people, that cannot be numbered nor counted for multitude. Give therefore thy servant an understanding heart to judge thy people, that I may discern between good and bad. For who is able to judge this thy so great a people? In verse 14, Solomon says, if a king judges the poor fairly, his throne will be established forever. And that's all he asked for. He asked for an understanding heart. He wanted wisdom to judge God's people fairly. And God answered that prayer. If you're familiar with that situation in 1 Kings, God told him, because you did not ask for riches, I'll give that to you. Because you did not ask for the death of your enemies, I will protect you. So not only did Solomon have the wisdom that he wanted, and he only wanted that to judge God's people fairly, God protected him and allowed him to accumulate great wealth. But the thing he wanted was to judge the people fair. And in doing that, his throne would be established forever. And here it is, 3,000 years later, we're still talking about King Solomon and the positive things that was in his life. Now in verse 15, we get down to the discipline concerning youth. Verse 15 of Proverbs 29, the rod of correction gives wisdom, but a youth left to himself is a disgrace to his mother. Here he speaks about the rod of correction. Now, this is an area that can easily get out of control, and I'll certainly say more about that as we go through this. But there is a time for discipline, and correction does give wisdom. But if a child is left to himself, there's going to be nothing but embarrassment. Proverbs 13:24 says, whoever spares the rod hates their children, but the one who loves their children is careful to discipline them. If your child is acting out, rebellious, just doing things that you know are wrong, then as a parent, we have the responsibility to do correction, even if it involves some kind of physical discipline. But we certainly need to be careful there. More about that later. But the rod of correction gives wisdom. A child left to himself is a disgrace to his mother. Verse 16. When the wicked are in authority, transgression increases, but the righteous will see their downfall. This is another situation where it seems like the wrong people are in charge. They are mishandling the things that they're responsible for. They're taking advantage of every situation. Transgressions will increase when this happens. But the righteous, those that desire to do right, those that want to do right, those that strive to do right, will see their downfall. We know that what's right will prevail. It might not happen as soon as we want it to. It might not come even during our lifetime. But there will be a payday someday. And the wicked, even though they are abusing their authority, they will at some point in their lifetime have to pay for that. And the righteous will see their downfall. Verse 17. Discipline your child, and they will give you peace of mind. They will give delight to your heart. This is a situation where a parent has really taken every opportunity to discipline their children, to correct them when they're making mistakes, and when that child is learning the right way to do things. There's a peace of mind that a parent has when a child is learning the right way to do things. Uh, they'll bring delight to your heart. Proverbs 22:6 says, train up a child in the way they should go, and when they're old, they will not depart from it. I don't think that is just given a situation that you can count on. I look at that as an instruction. When it says train up a child in the way they should go, I consider that like a commandment. Train up a child in the way they should go. You should do that. To not do that would be shunning that responsibility. But then he says, when they're old, they will not depart from it. That might come a time in their life when they depart from the teaching, they depart from the church. They don't always do the things that the parents hope they would do. But there's one thing for sure, as he says, when they're old, they will not depart from it. And that's important. As parents, we need to train them up as they should go. You do your part. God will do his part. When they're old, they will not depart from it. And there might come a time in your life where that's one of the few verses you can hang on to. So you make sure you do your part to train them up as they should go. Verse 18, without revelation, people run wild, but one who follows divine instructions will be happy. Without revelations, people run wild. Wow. But if you look at Judges chapter 21, verse 25, it says that every man did what was right in his own eyes. What a sad time that was for the nation of Israel, when there was no leadership, there was no responsibility, there was no accountability, and everybody was doing right in their own eyes. You can imagine how chaotic that would be. But he says in verse 18, without revelation, people run wild. They need to know. They need to be taught. They need to be shown. They need to be instructed. They need to be disciplined. Because without that, they will run wild. Now we come down to verse 19. It says, by mere words, servants are not disciplined, for though they understand, they will not give heed. Sometimes words are just not enough. Sometimes we have to do more than just counsel. You can tell them, and you can tell them, and you can tell them, but by mere words, it's just not getting it done. We need to understand that enough is enough. We've told you. We've said it over and over. Perhaps it's time to try something else. And here he says in verse 19, sometimes words are just not enough. Certainly we want to start with that. Give wise counsel. Say things that need to be done. Take corrective action. And if you can do it with words, that's great. But like he says in verse 19, sometimes words are just not enough. Verse 20, do you see someone who speaks too soon? Well, here's King Solomon gets comes down on this one pretty hard. There is more hope for a fool than for him. That's pretty harsh, but oftentimes a person will do that. They speak too soon. You can't finish a sentence. They finish it for you. One of the proverbs that King Solomon had in Proverbs chapter 18, he says the first one to speak sounds right until he is cross-examined. So don't be too quick to cut someone off. Don't be too quick to face or pass judgment when a person says something. Oftentimes, and almost without exception, there's two sides to every story. But according to King Solomon, someone who speaks too soon and passes judgment without knowing both sides, he says there's more hope for a fool than for him. That's pretty harsh, but we need to realize there are two sides to a story, and we need to hear it out before we have to pass judgment or take a position. Now that's the verses that we had in today's lesson. But I've got a couple of things I want to add to this. These are just a couple of things I'm doing in addition to what we're saying here, because we want to train up our children the way they should go. As a parent, that should be priority number one. That should be nothing more important. Well, once we bring children into this world, than to instruct them, to work with them, and to grow them into being Christians, fine citizens, people that just have a good reputation. I've written down some things here. These are some of my opinions. I've said this one numerous times, and not many people agree with it, but I'm sticking by what I'm saying. A good habit is as hard to break as a bad habit. Now, why people don't agree with that is because they have never tried to break a good habit. Why would you? Why would you want to break a good habit? But if you did, you would find it just as difficult as breaking a bad habit. That's why we need to learn the right way to do things. It can be simple, it can be complicated, it can be detailed, but we need to learn the right way to do things so it becomes a way of life. One of the things I do, I notice people when they go to write. This is the way I was taught to hold a pencil. Just the thumb and these two fingers. But I've noticed over the years the different ways that so many people hold a pen or a pencil when they're writing. And it's amazing to me. They learned that way. I learned this way. I actually went to school with a girl. She wrote upside down. She turned her page this way and would write across, and she was literally writing upside down. That's the way she learned to do it. And I'm sure wherever she is, she's still probably doing it that way. That's the way she learned. Nothing wrong with it. It gets the job done. But that's just one illustration. The way we learn things, it becomes second nature to us. It becomes a habit to us. You'll see it in sports. You'll see it in every phase of life. Learn the right way to do it, and you'll continue to do it that way. No need to try to break it. But if you did, you would find it's very difficult. A good habit is as hard to break as a bad habit. So develop good habits. That's where a parent comes in teaching their children. God would rather forgive than punish. We know John 3:16 tells us that God so loved the world, He gave His only begotten Son, that whoever believed in Him would not perish, but would have everlasting life. God has paid our sin debt. He has provided us a way out, and He would much rather forgive us than to punish us. But those that reject God's forgiveness will pay punishment from God. And that's sad. That's a sad thing. But we know that God would rather forgive than to punish. And I saw this the other day, and I thought this kind of meant a lot to me. It says, one of the hardest pills to swallow is to try to discipline the you out of your child. Them children that we bring into the world, they are a product of us. And I'm sure we can see us in everything that our child does. They will have their own makeup. They will do their own thing. But it's a hard thing to discipline a child when they're doing wrong. And we know that when we were a kid, when we were 13, when we were 16, we were doing the same exact thing. And it's a hard thing to do. But now we know. And it's our responsibility to try to correct that so they don't go down the same path that oftentimes we have been down. Now I have a series of little notes that I've made here that I think these will help in parents when it comes to discipline for their children. These are some of my thoughts. You have your own, but I'm going to share these with you as we get near the close. Teach children right from wrong with calm words and actions. They need to know right from wrong, and you need to teach them right from wrong. But you certainly need to do it with calm words and actions. The way we say things, the way we act, the way we try to discipline them, the way we say it, our tone can be so important. It can be so hurtful sometimes. We can say the right thing but say it the wrong way. But we need to teach children right from wrong with calm words and actions. We need to set limits. Let them know there's boundaries. These are areas that we're not going to go to. Set limits. Set limits. Be consistent. Give consequences. Be firm, but be fair. Let them know. Let them know up front that if you do something wrong, this is what's going to happen. Just don't drop it on them after they do it. Let them know. This is wrong. It's unacceptable. And this will not be tolerated. Be firm and be fair. Hear them out. Let them explain. You can walk in on a situation and all you see is that moment. Give them a chance to explain. Maybe there's more to the story. Just hear them out. Give them your attention. Your children need to know this. They are priority number one. And understand what they're dealing with, understand where they are in life, and make sure you give them attention. When you catch them being good, brag on them. Give them encouragement. They need to hear this. They need to know this. They need to hear a parent say that they're proud of them. You're the most important person in their life. You're their parent. And you need to brag on them when you know that they're doing something good. Know when not to respond. Things they deserve a response, but know when to respond. Like they say, praise in public, condemn in private. One of the worst things you can do is embarrass your child when they're around their peers. So praise in public, condemn in private. Our children are so important. They need discipline. They need to have godly parents that are setting godly examples. The church is one of the best places to bring a child up. If you find a good church where they're going to be taught the ways of God, let that church become a major part of their life. Teach them the right way to do things. There's nothing more important in your life right now than your children. And if discipline's required, then do it. But do it in a kind and loving way, not as a punishment, but as a discipline. I want to share something with you that when it comes to dealing with children One of the greatest lessons, one of the greatest life lessons I learned was when my boys were growing up, and I had the opportunity to coach them in sports. In 1985, the Down East Baseball became sanctioned for the first time as a sanctioned league. Up to that point, we had just played community ball, Davis, Williston, Marshallburg, Otway, Betty, Harkers Island, Atlantic. We just played different communities. But in '85, we came sanctioned under Babe Ruth, which was called Bambino. I had the opportunity to coach that all-star team that year, and it was a good bunch of kids. They were really, really good. They listened. They worked hard. We beat Pamlico for the district championship and had an opportunity to go to Wilmington to play in the state championship. That was a big challenge for us, and we went to Wilmington, and we lost our first game to Wilmington. We beat Wake County our second game. We beat Hoke County our third game, and then we lost to Greene County our fourth game. We actually finished fourth in the state playoffs in Bambino that year. That was a great experience, one I'll never forget. But there was another part of that I'll never forget. There was a program that was printed for the state playoffs, and in the back of that program, there was a little poem that someone had written, and I think it explains so much of what parents ought to be doing concerning their children. Now, this is directly geared to sports, especially baseball, but it's a great life lesson here, and this has become a part of my life and has been for many years. And I'd like to close by sharing those words with you. It says, "He stands at the plate with heart pounding fast. The bases are loaded. The die has been cast. Mom and Dad cannot help him. He stands all alone. A hit at this moment would send the team home. The ball nears the plate. He swings and he misses. There's a cheer from the crowd with some boos and some hisses. A thoughtless voice cries, 'Strike out the bum.' Tears fill his eyes. It's no longer fun. So open your heart. Give him a break. For it's moments like this a man you can make. Remember these words when others forget. He's just a little boy and not a man yet." Well, that's it for this week. Thank you for joining us. As usual, stay strong, keep the faith, and remember, God is able. See you next time.